Welcome to episode one of Hobby Quick Hits. I'm John Newman. You may know me potentially from the Sports Card Nation podcast. What this is going to be, it's going to be a short form podcast, no guests. Uh, we may do some videos of it, streaming at the same time we're recording. The first episode here is going to pertain to the grading card niche, something I'm very familiar with myself. And so, again, going back to the what this podcast is going to be about, Sports Card Nation. If you're familiar with that podcast, that comes out every Friday. We have interview guests. The Hobby Quick Hits is going to be the little brother. No set date when it comes out. Topics can range from anything on my mind pertaining to the hobby. I may do one a week, one every 2 weeks, two in 1 week. It really there's no set schedule, just whenever I get the creative itch. So here we are, episode one. Before we get started, if you could give us a follow. Right now, we just are on Twitter at Hits Hobby. That's at HITSHOBBY at Hits Hobby. Give us a follow. Get all the news and stuff from our page there. So I decided I wanted to kind of come out with a positive show, at least for the first episode. And most of the shows are going to be positive. I don't want to give any kind of other insinuation. And I want to talk about grading cards and give some tips. I've graded well over 1,000 cards, probably closer to 2,000 cards in total from when grading first hit the scene. I've been involved in the hobby since 1979 as a 7-year-old with my first pack. With grading, like I said, I've probably graded close to 2,000 cards. I don't have 2,000 graded cards in my inventory as I sell them, through Newman Sports Cards. But I probably do have at this point 400 to 500 in inventory. And it always seems like I do have a submission out for grading most of the time. I'm predominantly grade via PSA. I do grade BGS as well. So I do use both, but predominantly PSA. When I first started grading, I submitted myself. And the last year or year and a half, I've gone through other people who are higher level submitters, and they get better rates, and it's actually cheaper for me to submit with them than to do it on my own. So I've submitted with 2 or 3 different people. I'm not going to mention any names at the moment. One of our sponsors is Iron Sports Cards, and he is a PSA submitter, and I have used him. Highly recommended. But there's various submitters. You may have one you like more, or have a personal preference as well. With this episode, I'm going to try to get to the bare bones, but I'm also I want to talk a little bit, even if you have submitted, and just give some tips. So the first thing I want to broach with this episode is when grading first came out. I got to be honest, full disclosure, I was not a fan of it. I thought it was crazy. I had a store at the time, and a customer of mine that I knew very well came in, and he showed me he had some cards graded. And then he told me, what the service costs. And I honestly, I thought it was nuts. I said, man, it's your cards. You're sending them off to somewhere else. You got to trust that they don't switch cards, don't drop your card. You're paying them to tell you what condition your card's in, when frankly, to me at the time, me or you can look at that card and give our own assessment. I thought it was a racket. I thought it was a money grab, and I completely disliked it. I didn't partake in it. I thought it was foolishness. Uh, truth be told, I'm not always right. And in this case, I wasn't. I thought it was going to be a fad and not last. And here we are in 2020, and so much for that theory. So, grading is a big part of the hobby. With this show, folks, I don't want to get into all the scandals. We know what that is. That's for another day. I've broached that subject on the flagship show, Sports Card Nation. This is for those who do submit or maybe are thinking about submitting. These are just some tips over the years that I've learned uh, through trial and error, and probably more error than trial, and how to get better at submitting. So the biggest first question that people have when it comes to grading and submitting cards is, what do I submit? How do I know what cards to submit? And really, that's a personal preference. To the old saying, to each their own. Some people submit cards to grading that are PC cards, personal collection. Maybe it's their favorite player. It may not even be a big time player with a lot of value. It may just be someone they collect. And there's no wrong or right here. It's personal preference. For me, I probably fit into the category, a combo of that. I submit cards that I don't plan on flipping, if you will, or selling. Flipping sort of has a derogatory term, but reselling. And I do send cards in with the full intent to resell, to market them. So I've done both. I have some Chris Mullin cards. Chris Mullin's one of my favorite basketball players, fellow Brooklynite like myself. And so I have some Chris Mullin cards that I've submitted in the past that I knew when I sent them in that I wasn't going to resell these. These were going to just stay in my collection, on my desk, in my boxes, and whatnot. I've done that with other cards and other players in various sports as well. So if I was putting a percentage of, when I do a submission, how many are for resale and how much are just staying in the collection, I'd probably say 90-10. 90% for resale, and maybe 10 to 15% with no intent to market or move or put on eBay or any kind of selling platforms, or we have a Newman Sports Cards website. So probably nine out of 10 cards, 8 out of 10 cards are sent in with the purpose to try to get the highest grade possible, and um, you know market them to move to someone else who would like the card. So full disclosure. So going back to, eventually grading really did start to take off, and I did a 180. I was wrong on my early assessment of it. It became a major focal point of the hobby. There became certain cards, quite frankly, that to not buy graded, you almost couldn't trust them. A lot of people were trimming like the 93 SP Jeters and other key cards back from the early 90s, Ripken rookies and things of those ilk. And so grading really took off, and I admitted I was wrong, and I actually started to submit on my own. And when I first started submitting, I started with Beckett Graded. I didn't go into PSA until a little bit later on. So I started with Beckett Grading, and the mistakes I made early on with the submitting is I just submitted every card I liked or wanted to have slabbed. I didn't really do any kind of inspection. I just, oh, yep, I want to send that card in. I want to get that encased, put that in the store. And so my percentage rates on getting good grades on those first 3, 4, 5 submissions were not good. I did get some 9s, some 8.5, but I did get some 8s. I even remember getting a few 7.5s and being disappointed. And one of the things that we're all guilty of, I've gotten better over the years now, or many years now, is we don't like to be self-critical of our own cards. We always kind of sweep flaws on our own cards under the rug. But if we're looking at someone else's, we see every little thing. And so if you really want to be submit cards and get it down to a science, you have to almost pretend that your cards are not your cards, that they're someone else's, and you're looking at them. And you got to be very self-critical. You got to look for every little thing before you submit it. And so I've gotten better at that over the years. When I first started submitting to Beckett Graded, I was probably sending in 25 to 40 cards at a time, but I sort of on a consistent basis. And like I said, the first 4 or 5 submissions, I was not very discriminate. I was just kind of putting cards in piles and sending them on their way to get slabbed and graded. And some of those grades I got back were disappointing. And I talked to other people who were submitting. I learned stuff from them. I learned stuff the hard way on my own as well. And then I started being a little more proactive on what I sent. And, what I started doing at this point, I had my own brick and mortar store. So I was sending in at the time things I thought would a high grade, be more marketable, be attractive to customers in the store. And the biggest word of advice I can give you is what I do now. So I'll use what I do now because to me it's the best way. And I'm not trying to be conceited or cocky here, but now when I submit, if I send in, let's say 40 cards, I would say 34, 35 of them either get a 10 or very close are candidates for 10s. I have a high, now I'm predominantly PSA, so PSA 10s. And so what I do now when I submit is I call it my candidate list. Any cards that, whether I pull it out of a pack or I buy a collection off someone or a lot off someone, on whether it be on a Facebook group or eBay or wherever it might be. When I got acquire a card that I consider a grading candidate, I put it in a box that I've labeled grading candidates. At this point, it's just a candidate. I haven't really looked super close at it. When I get about 100 or 120 of these candidates, of these cards that add up, that's when I have an LED light here in my studio office, and I put it under the LED light. I also use other tools as well as the LED. I use a jeweler's loupe. I also have a lighted jeweler's loupe as well. So to get some light, and it's got some magnification. So I use those tools. I'll even use a simple, just magnifying glass. And I also have an 8x10 magnifying, like a plexiglass that will, blow it really way up. And so when I get this grading box, with 100, 120 cards, candidates in it, I will start to look at each card. And the biggest tip I can give you folks is really look. I know we have a tendency when it's our cards, a little ding, it's all right, no big deal. Remember, you might blow it off or you may poo-poo it, but that grader is going to see it. And they got even better tools sometimes than we do. I try to use the same ones to get that same parallel effect, but they're going to look under it with magnification, with lighting. So you shouldn't be able to slip anything by. So you got to be self-critical of your card. So going back to, let's say I have that 100 card candidate box. I go through each card. I take my time. It's not a race. It's not a race to see how fast you can get it done. Whenever you go too fast with stuff like that, trust me, it's going to come back with the grades you get. And so I go through each card. with those tools I just talked about. We'll look at them under magnification, all the corners, under LED light. And then the other thing we don't want to forget is you also have to look at the surface, okay, and handle them. I also wear medical gloves so I don't leave fingerprints, and I'll use a microfiber cloth to wipe down a card, especially your chromium type card. But even the regular cardboard cards can be wiped down a little bit. Just don't be too rough. Watch the corners. Don't drop them, obviously, and you want to keep that surface nice and fingerprint free. Look at all four corners. Look at surface, not even just for fingerprints, folks. You're looking at the surface, both sides, for indents, little nooks, or maybe something hit it and left a little indent. It's going to be the stuff that a grader is going to not miss, and you shouldn't miss it either. And what happens is that that 100 card candidate box might get whittled down to 45 cards. 55 might just get eliminated from my own pre-inspection, if you will. And then what I do is, let's say it's 45 cards, I do a second run through with all the same tools and take another look. And then maybe on the second run through, we're down to 35, maybe 40 cards on a good day. And those are the cards I eventually do submit, turn into PSA, Beckett graded, and the like. And so that's my advice, is to really be self-critical. Do 2 inspections, even when you've eliminated that percentage from the first run through. Give it another look-see, and only send the best of the best. And it took some trial and error, took many years. And I would say my percentage for PSA 10s is probably a high 90s, and that's honestly pretty good. And if you submit with someone, pick a submitter that maybe has a good track record. Some of these submitters will clean the cards for you as well. So here I am cleaning them and wiping down myself, and then they make sure I did my due diligence before they submit them for you. So grading, regardless of what's going on in the hobby right now, is a huge part of the hobby. Truth be told, I've sold a lot of expensive cards that were graded, and frankly, I got what I got money-wise because of the grade, rather than if it was a raw card. So it's a great asset if you sell cards. I do shows. I have an online website, so selling is a big part of what I do. But at the same time, I do, like I said earlier in the show, I also do grade cards that I have no intent on selling. It's the best of both worlds. I hope some of these tips help you out if you're thinking about doing it. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. It's hobbyquickhits@gmail.com. That's hobbyquickhits@gmail.com. And give the show a follow at Hits Hobby on Twitter. That's at Hits Hobby on Twitter. That's episode 1. We hope you enjoy the show, and we'll see you on episode 2 whenever it comes out. Thank you.